Tonight I'm reviewing the episode of South Park, Petit Tourette, and this episode came out in 2007, and it's very interesting to see how this episode holds up over 11 years later, and they just had the 22nd season of South Park, so I kind of figure, until next year, I want to kind of review an episode weekly that I like or that's on TV that kind of stands out, so I'm choosing this episode. So in this episode, Cartman meets this kid Thomas who suffers from Tourette syndrome, and the way they do that in South Park is that they show one aspect of Tourette syndrome where people have an impulsivity to say whatever they want with, and in this case, it's using foul language. So this kid Thomas uses foul language uncontrollably. It's a neurological thing. So Cartman decides to take advantage of that, and I think later on in the episode, he feels like he can say whatever he wants and he can play the victim card. So he ends up on television, and he's at a point where he says whatever he wants, that he reveals personal stuff about his life. Like, he reveals that he wets the bed, he reveals that he has a crush on Patty Nelson, he reveals that there was some incest between him and his cousin. So he doesn't want to go on TV because he got to a point, and so instead of saying racial slurs against Kyle and Jewish people, instead of being anti-Semitic, instead of just cursing and saying whatever he wanted to, what's cool to him, he got to a point where he can only just say stuff that embarrasses him. So, he goes on Dateline and it gets all sabotaged and stuff like that because of Kyle. So he doesn't get embarrassed and all that. And I think this is a really interesting episode because, first of all, being a writer, a lot of people like this episode, and then there's a lot of people who didn't like this episode. Like, they did kind of feel that this episode was very clunky as a story. That, Chris Hansen gets introduced in the middle of this, and then that kind of sets up the ending where it's almost like Cartman's afraid to go on television, but he has to go on television because people who end up on To Catch a Predator or the Chris Hansen show end up committing suicide. So Chris Hansen moves from To Catch a Predator to interviewing Cartman. So Cartman just knows his options are either go on TV and embarrass himself or commit suicide. But then at the end of the episode, they do a joke about Chris Hansen because what happens is Kyle and this kid with Tourette's, they don't want Cartman to go on TV on Dateline and use it as an opportunity to say whatever he wants, and they don't know at that point in the story that Cartman is saying things about his personal life. So they get a bunch of pedophiles to go to the Dateline show to meet Chris Hansen, and then these pedophiles commit suicide in the audience, so the special gets canceled, so Cartman's not on the air. And then at the end, they realize that they actually did not get even with Cartman because they ended up helping Cartman out and stuff. Because Cartman's original plan was to embarrass people, but then he ended up embarrassing himself. So yeah, I do think this episode has that where the Chris Hansen thing's kind of thrown in. I do think that in the middle of the episode where Cartman kind of says, it's not embarrassing or something like that, then after he says that line, he says something about his life to Kyle, and then he keeps going the rest of the episode. So it felt like a Deus Ex Machina moving the plot along type of thing where it just got thrown in there just to kind of have an ending to the episode. And another thing is that I kind of want to say is that I liked how this episode used foul language because a lot of people do struggle with using foul language in their writing and their screenplays. Like, it's that saying where everybody says, people are trying to be a little too much like Quentin Tarantino with their swearing and stuff. So I think this episode does it very well because it's introducing a very serious issue, and Cartman swears just to make fun of what he's doing, but there's also subtext. Everybody thinks that he's telling the truth. He is being somebody with a Tourette syndrome, but he's actually doing it as a joke and stuff. And I think then that becomes really good writing. And I think this is a very good episode because outside of this character Thomas kind of reveals that through expository dialogue that he's embarrassed that he makes a fool out of himself, that his Tourette's led to his dad getting a divorce, and he kind of wishes that he was dead. And I like that because it's emotionally powerful, and honestly that's true to how some people feel who have disabilities. Like, some people are very severe or really into their disabilities, or like low functioning autism, mental retardation, where they can't kind of comprehend what's going on around them. And then there's people with mild autism, there's people with like mild OCD, Tourette syndrome, or people like Thomas within this South Park universe who is at a point where he can live an everyday life. Like he's not so into his disability that he doesn't have any like self-awareness or consciousness of the world around him. So when you have people who are kind of in the middle ground of a lot of disabilities, especially childhood, teenager years, adulthood, and all that, some of them do have a lot of depression. Some of them kind of know that they're going to be ostracized, that they're going to be embarrassed, that they're going to stand out because of a quirk or an idiosyncrasy that they cannot control. So it leads to depression. It leads to people feeling inferior or subservient. And personally in my life, I've seen people who have grown up with like autism or mild autism or symptoms of autism, and most of them don't even want to do the best that they can because they're afraid that people are going to think that that they have Asperger's syndrome because they choose to study a lot and be educated. Also, like I know, like, and also they talk about suicide a lot. Like I've actually had a friend who took a psychological evaluation test in high school, and he said that after he found out that the doctor said that he had autism, he wished that his mother had an abortion because he just knew that no matter where he went in his life, everybody's going to always look at him as like the silly boy or the goofball and all that. And that's really sad to say that, but I like that they had Thomas's character say that because I think that is very true to how people with disabilities feel who struggle with it, is that they know that it puts them at a sociological detriment, and that's something that can be lasting the rest of their life. And sometimes it takes a very hard time, but a lot of counseling and a lot of psychological maturity and discipline to overcome these things. But also, I also think in this episode, I like how the town reacts to Cartman's disability, where it's also talking about, and it's interesting because, right now we're at a time in society where we're very culturally sensitive. And this episode does have the consequences of that, where there's people who don't kind of look into Cartman's disability to see if he has it or not, and there's unlimited support system, and some people get that, some people don't, and then there's some people like Cartman who can fake a disability to go what they want. And I've actually known people who have disabilities or fake disabilities to get what they want and do horrible things and manipulate people because of their disability label into being victims or into doing whatever they want and stuff. And like a personal story that I also know of somebody who I went to high school with, and this person gets into a lot of trouble with the law and stuff. And what I found out is that how they kind of got away with a lot of stuff in court is that they would kind of say, I have a disability, I don't understand how to say my name or this and that. And they would kind of get off the hook with a lot of stuff because the judge would kind of be, their judge or whatever would be kind of like, I can't really put you on trial because I know you have a documented disability, but I can't kind of question that and all that. And there's people who kind of play that card their entire lives of, because they have a disability, they can get away with whatever they want. And because people are sensitive to their disability, they can play that card. And it's very despicable, but, I think that's good that Trey Parker and Matt Stone touch upon it in this episode. And, people can use their disabilities as an excuse to get what they want, but also there are people who do struggle with disabilities and live very troubled and challenging lives and stuff. And it's good that, there are people like, I think Craig or Clyde in this episode who befriends Thomas at the very end. So it also does give a hope to people who do have disabilities that there are people who will accept them. There are people who will just look at who they are as people and in a friendship way, and not just, you're disabled, you have a disability, and that's all I see about you. There's more of that out there, but then there's also a lot of people who are very progressive and are like, I respect you for you. I'm into you as a person. I'm not into your disability or whatever. So I like that they touch upon that and all. And I also think that, to add into what I said before, and I think I'm maybe repeating myself, that I do think it touches in about like how people like Cartman who are a bit sociopathic, how they can manipulate people to get what they want. And sometimes there is a sensitivity. People are just openly are openly giving them all the chances that they want and just not questioning their disabilities or if they're real or faking it and stuff. And there's people who do that. So I think this is a really great episode. I really like this one, and I think everybody should watch this. But it's one of the best episodes of South Park. And, for people who have learning disabilities and people who have struggled with depression and other issues like that, I think this is a good episode because I think this episode really humanizes. I really like how Trey Parker and Matt Stone are saying things that are kind of tough, but things that need to be said. That, people who do have disabilities and, people who who have family members or whatever that kind of talk about their disabilities or kind of itemize them or say, my son is autistic, my son has OCD, my son has Tourette's and whatever. This episode is good, and I like it because it does talk a little bit about the depression that people have who struggle with disabilities. And it's very well needed because I think that's underrepresented, even 11 years later. So I think this is a very brave episode, and I really appreciate it. And I really think that it does a good job of showing the other side of disabilities, where there are people who don't have it and can manipulate people enough to get what they want, and then there's people who have it who manipulate people to get what they want and stuff. And also just how people can blindly be supportive and not question the behavior of people with disabilities, especially if they know who they are through their entire lives and know that they're not good people or they have a backstory of just lying to get things and all that. So overall, really, really good episode, and it's one of those that I do recommend. And I think that it's a well-written script, and it's a good way of looking at how people can use profanity within a script and make something effective and not use profanity in a shock value type of way. All right, that's all I got to say about Le Petit Tourette.